They say you forget everything when they turn you into a servitor. They're wrong. My designation is Labor Servitor Theta 74427 MK3, but I remember my name. I remember being Marcus Thane. I remember everything, and that's the worst part. That's the punishment within the punishment. The curse that the Adeptus Mechanicus accidentally left me with when they stripped away my humanity and replaced it with hydraulics and steel. I'm going to tell you my story, all of it. Not because I think it will change anything. Nothing changes in the Imperium of Man, not in 10,000 years, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what happens to people like me, the millions upon millions of us, shuffling through the corridors of Hive Cities, manning the guns of Imperial warships, serving in the palace halls of planetary governors. We were human once. Some of us still are. Trapped inside, let me start at the beginning. Let me tell you about the day that ended my life. Even though my heart still beats, after a fashion, and my lungs still draw breath. Assisted by the respirator unit bolted to my chest. I was 27 years old when they took me. 27 years. 3 months and 16 days to be precise. I remember because it was 2 weeks before my sister's wedding. I'd been saving for months to buy her a proper gift. A small electrum pendant with the Aquila engraved on it. Nothing fancy, not on a manufacturum worker's wage, but it was real metal, not the reclaimed scrap most people in the Hive wore. I lived on Corvanus Hive World, Segmentum Solar. Hive Primus to be specific. Hab Block 7 Epsilon, level 142. 17 billion people lived in that hive, stacked on top of each other like rats in a cage. Breathing recycled air and eating protein paste extruded from algae vats and the rendered corpses of those who died in the lower levels. It wasn't a good life, but it was mine. I worked in Manufacturum Complex 7, producing bolt shell casings for the Imperial Guard regiments being raised for the endless wars across the galaxy. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. My job was to monitor the stamping machines, clear jams, replace worn components, and make sure production quotas were met. The quotas were everything. The Imperium runs on quotas. Every planet, every hive, every manufacturum has its assigned production targets, handed down from the Administratum on Holy Terra itself. Miss your quota, and the entire facility gets punished. Rations reduced. Work hours increased. Inspections by the Arbites. Or worse, much worse, investigation by the Adeptus Mechanicus for suspected inefficiency. I'd worked there for 9 years. 9 years without a single incident report. I was good at my job. Reliable. The kind of worker the Imperium needs. The kind that shows up, does the work, asks no questions, and dies at their station if required. That day, the last day, started like any other. The alarm sirens woke me at 5 hours. I dressed in my work coveralls, ate a ration bar that tasted like compressed cardboard and mineral supplements, and headed to the transit lifts that would take me down to the Manufactorum levels. That's where it went wrong. The servo lifts in Section 7 Epsilon had been malfunctioning for weeks. Everyone knew it. We'd filed 17 maintenance requests with the Administratum. 17 requests that vanished into the bureaucratic void, unanswered and ignored. When you have 17 billion people in a hive, a few broken lifts aren't a priority. That morning, the lifts failed completely. Hundreds of us were stuck, waiting in the transit stations while maintenance servitors, the irony isn't lost on me now, worked to repair the systems. We waited and waited. The minutes ticked by. 5:30 to 5:40. Our shift started at 6 o'clock hours, sharp. At 5:50, the lifts came back online. We crammed in, pressed shoulder to shoulder, and descended into the Manufactorum levels. I ran from the lift station to my workstation, boots clanging on the metal grating, lungs burning from the chemical-tainted air. I clocked in at 6:14. 14 minutes late, my supervisor, a woman named Hester Grohl, throne rest her soul, wherever it is now, looked at me with something between pity and fear. She was 40 years older than me, had worked in that manufactorum her entire life, and she knew what 14 minutes meant. "Marcus," she said quietly, "you need to file an appeal immediately. Explain about the lifts. Get witness statements." I nodded. I wasn't worried. It was obviously not my fault. The lift failure was documented. Dozens of other workers were late too. The administratum would understand. The administratum never understands. I went to my station and started my work. The stamping machines roared, pressing out bolt casings by the thousands, the rhythm of industry that never stops, never slows. I checked tolerances, cleared a jam in machine 7, replaced a worn hydraulic seal. At 11 hours, they came for me, the Adeptus Astartes, 2 of them, in their black carapace armor, shock mauls hanging from their belts, the judge's seal emblazoned on their chests. Everyone in the manufactorum stopped working. Even the machines seemed quiet, though that was probably my imagination. "Marcus Thane?" the first Arbit said, his voice flat and emotionless through his helmet's Vox grill. "Yes, but you are under arrest for dereliction of duty and sabotage of Imperial production quotas." "Come with us, sabotage, that word." That horrible word. I was only 14 minutes late. "The lifts failed. There are witnesses, I can explain." The shock maul came out so fast I barely saw it. The pain was instant and absolute, every nerve in my body screaming as I collapsed to the deck. Through the white-hot agony, I heard the second Arbite speaking. "Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is heresy." They dragged me away. The last thing I saw was Hester's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, and the fear in the eyes of every other worker. Fear that they might be next. Because any of them could be. Any of us could be. In the Imperium there is no justice, only order. The Arbit's detention facility was exactly what you'd imagine. Gray rockcrete walls, harsh white lumen strips, the smell of fear sweat and disinfectant. They threw me in a cell with 11 other people, all of us awaiting judgment for various crimes. There was a man who'd been caught stealing food rations for his starving children. A woman who'd spoken out against a supervisor who was taking bribes. An old man whose only crime was being too slow at his assembly line job, costing the manufactorum precious seconds of production time. We were all guilty of the same thing. Really, being inconvenient to the Imperium's vast machinery. I spent 3 days in that cell. 3 days of hunger, thirst, and growing terror. We weren't told when our trials would be. We weren't allowed to speak to anyone from the outside. We simply waited. On the 3rd day they came for me. The courtroom, if you could call it that, was a small chamber with a single desk, behind which sat a magistrate of the Adeptus Astartes. He was an old man, his face a network of scars and cybernetic implants, his eyes replaced with optical augmentics that glowed a faint red in the dim light. My trial lasted exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds. I know because there was a chronometer on the wall, counting down with mechanical precision. The magistrate read the charges. Dereliction of duty. 14 minutes of lost production time. Potential sabotage of Imperial manufacturing operations. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. The transit lifts failed. There are records. There were dozens of other workers who... The records show you clocked in 14 minutes late. Do you dispute this fact? No, but then you are guilty. The Lex Imperialis is clear. Every worker is responsible for arriving at their assigned station at the designated time, regardless of circumstance. Failure to do so is dereliction of duty. But I had no control over the lifts. You had control over when you left your habitation unit. You could have departed earlier to account for potential malfunctions. You did not. Your inefficiency cost the manufactorum 14 minutes of production. In that time, the stamping machines at your station could have produced approximately 1,247 bolt casings. Each casing is necessary for the Emperor's wars. Your failure has potentially cost the lives of Imperial Guardsmen, who will not have ammunition for their Weapons. The logic was insane, circular, impossible to argue against. "I sentence you," the magistrate continued, his voice never changing tone or inflection, "to repurposing. Your body will serve the Imperium more effectively as a servitor than it has as a citizen. Take him. No, no! Please, I have a sister. I have a family, please." The shock maul again. More pain. Darkness. I woke in a transport vehicle, my wrists and ankles bound with magno cuffs. Through the barred windows, I could see we were descending deep into the Hive, down to levels I'd never been to, places where even the recycled air tasted of rust and death. There were 5 others in the transport with me. A young woman, maybe 18, who sobbed quietly. An older man who stared at nothing, his mind already gone to some distant place. A tech priest who'd been found guilty of heresy against the Omnissiah. His own order was turning him into a servitor. 2 others, a man and a woman who held hands and whispered prayers to the Emperor. None of us would be heard. The facility of the Adeptus Mechanicus loomed before us like a cathedral to some dark god. And in a way it was, the machine god, the Omnissiah, the aspect of the Emperor that the Mechanicus worships above all else. The building was all Gothic spires and industrial brutalism, covered in brass and steel, pipes and cables running across its surface like veins. We were herded inside. The smell hit me first. A mixture of antiseptic, machine oil, incense, and something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in warm air. The interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, lit by red lumen strips that cast everything in the color of blood. We were taken to a processing chamber. Tech priests moved around us like red-robed ghosts, their augmented bodies clicking and whirring. Mechadendrites reaching out to scan us with devices I couldn't name. They spoke in a mixture of High Gothic and binary cant, their voices distorted by vox grills and vocal augmentics. One of them, a tall figure with more machine than flesh, his face hidden behind a brass mask, approached me. His optical implants focused on my face, a beam of red light scanning up and down my body. Subject, Marcus Thane. Age, 27 standard years. Mass, 78 kilograms. Muscle density, acceptable. Bone structure, adequate. Neural pathways, nominal. Genetic markers, clean. He turned to another tech priest. Classification? Labor pattern servitor, category 7. Standard conversion protocol. Note: cortical structure suggests capacity for limited retention. Recommend minimal lobotomy for adaptive function. That last part, those words that damned me to something worse than oblivion, limited retention. Most servitors, I would learn, receive full lobotomization. The parts of the brain responsible for personality, memory, emotion, all of it gets scooped out or burned away with neural inhibitors. What's left is a biological machine, capable of following commands and performing tasks, but with no awareness, no consciousness, no suffering. But some jobs need more. Some jobs require problem-solving, pattern recognition, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. For those jobs, the Mechanicus performs what they call minimal lobotomy. They leave just enough of the mind intact to handle complex tasks, but suppress everything else with behavioral inhibitors and compliance protocols. It's more efficient, they say. It's also hell. We were stripped, cataloged, and assigned to conversion chambers. I was taken down a long corridor, past dozens of operating theaters where I could see through reinforced glass windows the conversion process happening to others. I saw a man on a table, his screams muffled by a gag, as tech priests removed his arms and replaced them with industrial manipulators. I saw a woman having her entire lower body amputated, replaced with a tracked base and cargo lift. I saw a child, Emperor forgive them, a child no more than 12, being converted into a cherub, those flying servo skull things that attend to nobles and high-ranking officials. Her back was being cut open to install the suspensor units that would keep her aloft. Each one was awake. each one aware. The Mechanicus doesn't believe in wasting anesthetic on the soon-to-be servitors. Pain is just data. Suffering is irrelevant. The body is merely a machine to be repurposed. My turn came. They strapped me to a surgical table that was more like a docking station. My wrists, ankles, waist, and chest were bound with steel restraints. A tech priest with multiple arms, some flesh, some mechanical, leaned over me. "Conversion will now commence," he said in a voice that had no sympathy, no malice, no emotion at all. "The Omnissiah provides. The flesh is weak. The machine is eternal." They injected something into my neck. Not anesthetic. I wish it had been anesthetic. It was something else, something that paralyzed my voluntary muscles, but left all sensation intact. I could feel everything but couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even close my eyes. The first cut was down my left arm. I felt the scalpel, or whatever cutting tool they used, slice through skin, then muscle, then the scraping sensation of it hitting bone. Blood ran down my arm, but machines immediately sucked it away, recycling it, filtering it, pumping it back into my body through tubes inserted into my veins. They removed the flesh of my arm methodically, like butchers processing meat, which I suppose is exactly what they were doing. When they reached the shoulder joint, they used something that screamed with a high-pitched whine, and suddenly my arm came free, severed completely. I would have vomited if my body could respond. Instead, I could only watch in the reflection of the metal instruments as they tossed my arm into a disposal. "Shoot! Installing primary manipulator. Assembly," one of the tech priests said. They brought the replacement, a massive industrial drill arm, designed for boring through rockcrete and metal. It was nearly as long as my entire body had been tall, made of reinforced steel and equipped with various interchangeable bits and blades. They positioned it against my shoulder stump. Then they began the fusion process, molecular welding, they called it. The machine arm had connection points that they pressed against my bones, my nerves, my blood vessels. Then they activated it. The pain was beyond description. It was like every nerve in my shoulder was on fire and being crushed simultaneously. The smell of burning flesh, my burning flesh, filled my nostrils. The welding took 47 minutes. I counted every second in my head, trying to focus on anything other than the agony. When it was done, the drill arm was part of me, connected to my nervous system through a network of cables and neural interfaces. Testing motor functions, the arm moved. I hadn't told it to move, but it did anyway, the drill spinning up with a high-pitched whine. My arm, their arm, I didn't know anymore. Then they started on my legs. Both legs were deemed insufficient for projected workload requirements. They removed them at the hip, the same methodical butchery as my arm. I watched my legs, the legs that had carried me for 27 years, that had walked with my sister through the Hab Block markets, that had run to my workstation that final morning, disappear down the disposal chute. The replacement was a tracked base unit with hydraulic pistons. They installed a connection plate directly into my pelvis, drilling into the bone with such force I could feel it in my teeth, my jaw, my skull. The hydraulics connected to my spine through neural ports they installed by driving needles into my vertebrae. When they activated the system for the first time, every muscle in my back spasmed. I would have screamed, but my vocal cords were paralyzed by the drug. Blood ran from my mouth where I'd bitten through my tongue. Spinal integration successful. Proceeding to respiratory augmentation. They cut open my chest. I felt the ribs being spread apart with some kind of mechanical device, and installed a respirator unit. My lungs would no longer work on their own, they explained. The respirator would do it for me more efficiently, requiring less oxygen, producing less waste, more machine, less human. The surgery continued for hours. They installed a waste recycling system, so I would never need to stop working to use facilities. They replaced my eyes with optical augmentics, giving me better vision in darkness and the ability to see targeting reticules for precision work. They installed additional muscle groups in my remaining organic shoulder and back, vat-grown tissue to help me lift heavier loads. But the worst, the absolute worst, was the cranial work. They shaved my head and secured my skull in a vise. I felt the pressure mounting, felt my skull being immobilized completely. Then came the drilling. 6 points. They drilled into my skull in 6 different locations, each one a fresh new horror of grinding, vibrating pressure that I felt in my teeth, my jaw, my entire head. When each drill broke through into my skull, I felt it, a terrible pressure release, and then the sensation of something foreign inside my head. Initiating neural port installation, they fed cables into my brain, fiber optic threads, each one no thicker than a hair, but I felt every single one as they wormed through my brain tissue. They were connecting to specific areas: motor cortex, speech centers, memory centers, the parts of my brain that made me human. The cortex collar came next. A band of metal and circuitry that they locked around my skull, with the cables from my brain feeding into it. This was the control mechanism, they explained to each other in their emotionless voices. Through this, they could send commands directly to my brain, override my voluntary control, suppress unwanted behaviors. They could make me a puppet, installing behavioral inhibitors. I felt something change. It's hard to describe, but suddenly I couldn't think certain thoughts. Ideas that had been there moments before just vanished when I tried to grasp them. Rebellion, escape, resistance. Even the words felt slippery, like trying to hold water. Installing compliance protocols. Another change. A pressure in my head, like hands wrapping around my brain. I felt compelled to obey. Not wanted to, compelled. When they said, "Move your new arm," the arm moved, and I realized with horror that I hadn't decided to move it. The command had bypassed my conscious mind entirely, installing language restrictions. My throat suddenly felt tight. They were doing something to my vocal cords, my speech centers. When I tried to form words in my mind, help me, or stop, or please, they just disappeared. I couldn't say them. Couldn't even think them properly anymore. The final installation was the Vox unit. They removed my vocal cords entirely and replaced them with a mechanical voice synthesizer, hardwired to only produce specific phrases. Compliance and acknowledged and task complete, and other simple, utilitarian responses. My voice, the voice my mother had heard when I said my first words. The voice that had laughed with friends, that had told my sister I loved her, was gone forever, replaced with a mechanical monotone. Conversion complete. Subject Theta 74427 MK3 is operational. Beginning programming phase. They uploaded instructions directly into my brain. How to operate the drill arm, how to move on the tracked base, how to interface with machinery, how to recognize commands, how to obey. Always obey. The programming felt like someone else's thoughts in my head, foreign but undeniable. Knowledge that wasn't mine, but that I somehow possessed. When it was done, they unstrapped me from the table and activated my motor functions. Stand, a tech priest commanded. I stood. Not because I wanted to, but because the command went directly into my motor cortex through the cortex collar. And my body obeyed before my mind could even process the order. Move forward 10 meters. My tracked base whirred to life. Hydraulics hissing, and I moved forward exactly 10 meters. Stopping with mechanical precision. Acceptable. Assigned to Manufactorum Theta 7. Labor-intensive operations. And just like that, Marcus Thane was gone. In his place was Labor Servitor Theta 74427 MK3. But here's the thing they didn't know. The thing that makes this so much worse. I was still aware. The first few days, I thought I'd gone mad. I could see through my new optical implants, but the vision was different, overlaid with targeting data, efficiency readouts, mechanical diagnostics. I could hear, but my hearing was augmented, picking up frequencies that human ears shouldn't be able to detect. The high-pitched whine of electronics, The low rumble of distant machinery. I could feel my drill arm, heavy and cold and wrong. I could feel the hydraulic pistons in my back and hips, the respirator forcing air into my lungs with mechanical regularity. I could feel the cables in my brain, a constant presence like an itch I could never scratch, but I couldn't speak, couldn't scream, couldn't cry. When I tried to move voluntarily, the behavioral inhibitors kicked in. It was like hitting a wall inside my own head. The thought, I want to move my arm, would form, and then nothing. The thought would just dissolve, replaced by the programming. Await commands. Compliance is mandatory. I was a prisoner in my own body. They assigned me to Manufactorum Theta 7, a massive industrial complex that produced components for Imperial starships. My job was simple. Use the drill arm to bore mounting holes in bulkhead sections, then lift the bulkheads, each weighing approximately 300 kilograms, and carry them to the assembly stations. 16 hours a day. Every day. No breaks except for a 15-minute maintenance period every 4 hours where servitors would replace my drill bits and apply lubricant to my joints. The work was agonizing. My remaining organic parts, my right arm, my torso, my head were subjected to constant stress. The drill arm's weight pulled at my shoulder constantly. The heavy loads I carried strained my back beyond what any human body should endure. My organic muscles tore and healed and tore again, constantly adapting to the impossible demands. But the pain suppressors they'd installed didn't quite work right. Or maybe they worked exactly as intended, suppressing just enough pain that I could function, but leaving enough that I was always aware of my body's suffering. And I was aware. So horribly, completely aware. I watched the other servitors around me, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, throughout the Manufactorum. Most of them were clearly gone. Whatever had made them human had been completely removed. They moved with mechanical precision, responded to commands instantly, never hesitated, never showed any sign of consciousness. But some of them I could tell were still aware. There was a servitor at the station next to mine. She'd been converted into a welding unit, her arms replaced with industrial plasma torches. In the brief moments when we'd pass each other, when neither of us was actively working, I'd see her optical implants track to me. Not the vacant stare of a mindless automaton, but actual focus, actual awareness, and in that awareness I saw the same thing I felt. Absolute horror. We couldn't communicate. Our Vox units were limited to work-related responses only, but sometimes, during the maintenance periods when we'd both be in the service bays, our optical implants would meet, and I knew she understood. She remembered. She was still human inside. How many of us were there? How many servitors throughout the Imperium, assumed to be mindless, were actually still conscious, still suffering? I started to notice things. Patterns. The servitors who were still aware, we made mistakes sometimes. Small ones. A drill hole slightly off-center. A weld with a minor imperfection. Nothing that would affect function, but enough to show that we weren't perfectly machine-calibrated. Enough to show that something human was still fighting inside. The mindless ones never made mistakes. They were perfect. Efficient. Everything the Mechanicus wanted. We, the aware ones, were the mistakes. The errors in the conversion process. The ones who got to experience every moment of our transformation into living tools. Time became meaningless. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. Maybe years. The chronometer in my visual display kept track, but after a while, I stopped paying attention to it. What did it matter? Every day was the same, 100 hours activation. The Manufactorum systems would send a signal to my cortex collar, and my body would automatically power up from standby mode. I had no choice in this. One moment I'd be in the gray emptiness of standby, not sleep, not consciousness, just absence, and the next I'd be awake, aware, and suffering. 6:01 hours, report to station. My tracked base would carry me automatically to my assigned workstation. The command was hardwired, direct from the Manufactorum control systems to my motor cortex. I was a passenger in my own body. 6:02 hours. Begin work cycle. Lift the bulkhead section from the conveyor. Carry it to the drilling station. Position it with millimeter precision. Activate drill arm. Bore mounting holes according to the specifications uploaded to my visual display. Move to next section. Repeat. The work was mind-numbing. Or it would have been if I could have actually let my mind go numb. But I couldn't. I was trapped in awareness, forced to consciously experience every single repetition, every lift, every drill operation, every step on my tracked base. Lift, drill, position, repeat. Lift, drill, position, repeat. 300 times a day. Every day, my organic body screamed in protest. The muscles in my shoulder, forced to compensate for the drill arm's weight, developed constant spasms. My spine, where the hydraulic pistons connected, felt like someone was grinding broken glass into my vertebrae. The pain suppressors kept it manageable, barely, but they couldn't eliminate it entirely, and I felt all of it. Every moment of it. The worst part wasn't even the physical pain. It was the mental torture, the awareness of what I'd lost. I'd think about my sister. Was she married now? Did she wonder what happened to me? The administratum probably told her I'd been executed or sent to a penal legion. They wouldn't tell her the truth that I was still here, shuffling through a manufactorum less than 100 kilometers from where she lived, transformed into this thing. I'd think about the small things I'd taken for granted. The taste of food, real food, not the nutrient paste they pumped directly into my stomach through a feeding port. The feeling of walking on my own legs. The ability to turn my head when I wanted to, not just when commanded. The simple act of speaking, of forming words, of expressing thoughts, all gone. Sometimes in the brief maintenance periods, I'd try to fight the behavioral inhibitors. I'd focus all my will on moving my drill arm without a command, or speaking a word that wasn't in my approved vocabulary, or simply turning away from my workstation. The inhibitors would trigger immediately. It felt like a spike of pure agony driven through my frontal lobe. Not physical pain, worse. A mental anguish so severe that my consciousness would start to fracture, my thoughts scattering like broken glass. After a few seconds of that, I'd give up. The pain would fade, replaced by a chemical flood of compliance hormones that the collar released directly into my brain. A reward system. Obey and the pain stops. Resist and suffer. Behavioral conditioning at the neurological level. I learned to obey, not because I wanted to, but because the alternative was unbearable. I wasn't alone in my awareness. I'd realized that early on, but it took time to truly understand the scope of what the Mechanicus had done, not just to me, but to countless others. The Manufactorum employed approximately 4,000 servitors. Of those, I estimated that at least 50 were still aware to some degree, maybe more. It was hard to tell because we couldn't communicate, couldn't reach out to each other, couldn't even acknowledge our shared suffering. But I watched them. In the moments between commands, when my optical implants were free to scan my surroundings, I watched. There was the welding servitor I'd noticed early on. Her designation was stamped on her chassis, Delta 3 8821 MK7. She worked the assembly line, welding bulkhead sections together with precision that would shame any human welder. But sometimes, when a piece didn't align properly, I'd see her hesitate. Just for a fraction of a second, long enough to show that she was thinking, evaluating, rather than just executing programmed responses. There was a cargo servitor, a massive thing, more machine than flesh, with a tracked base twice the size of mine and hydraulic lifting arms capable of moving 10-ton loads. His designation was Gamma 14429 MK5. I'd watch him work, and sometimes he'd set a load down just slightly harder than necessary. Not hard enough to damage anything, but hard enough to show frustration. Frustration, a human emotion, emerging from what was supposed to be a mindless automaton. There was a medical servitor who I'd see occasionally when servitors needed more extensive repairs than the simple maintenance bays could provide. She'd been a chirurgeon once, I think. Her organic hands had been replaced with surgical implements, scalpels, bone saws, suture devices. But her head was largely intact, her brain clearly needed for the medical knowledge required for her function. When she worked on damaged servitors, I'd see her optical implants linger on their faces. Looking for something, looking for awareness in the others perhaps, looking for fellow prisoners. Once she worked on me. A hydraulic seal in my spine had ruptured, leaking fluid and causing my legs to lock up. They brought me to her surgical station, and she repaired the damage with mechanical efficiency. But as she worked, I felt something, a touch that was just slightly gentler than necessary. A pause that lasted a fraction of a second longer than it should. And when she finished, when my motor systems were about to reactivate and carry me back to my station, our optical implants met, and I saw it. Behind the targeting data and the mechanical readouts in her augmented vision, I saw awareness. I saw recognition. I saw the same trapped horror that I felt. Then my legs activated, and I was carried away. I never saw her again, but I never forgot that moment. That brief connection with another prisoner in our shared hell. Every few months, new servitors would arrive at the manufactorum. Fresh conversions from the Mechanicus facility, assigned to replace those who had broken down or been reassigned elsewhere. Watching them arrive was another layer of horror. Most of them were clearly mindless. The full lobotomy had taken everything, leaving only the biological components and programming. They'd shuffle to their stations, interface with the control systems, and begin working without any sign of consciousness or confusion. But some of them, the aware ones, you could tell immediately. They'd arrive confused, their optical implants scanning frantically, their mechanical limbs moving with the jerky uncertainty of someone still trying to figure out how their new body worked. The behavioral inhibitors kept them obedient, kept them moving where they were commanded, but you could see the panic in their movements. One day they brought in a group of 5 new servitors. 4 of them were clearly gone, moving with that empty precision of the mindless. But the 5th, labor servitor Theta 74431 MK3, was different. He was young, maybe 19 or 20 standard years. They'd converted him into a configuration similar to mine: drill arm, tracked base, heavy lifting capacity. His designation number was close to mine, meaning he'd probably been processed at the facility around the same time I was, just assigned to a different location until now. As they led him to his station, 3 stations down from mine, I watched him. His optical implants were scanning everything, moving in patterns that showed conscious thought rather than programmed tracking. When he passed another servitor, I saw him try to speak, his Vox grill activating, but only producing the standard compliance response. The awareness in him was obvious. He'd realized what had happened to him. He knew he was trapped. Over the next few days, I watched him go through the same process I had. The initial panic, testing the limits of the behavioral inhibitors, the pain when he pushed too hard against them. The gradual, horrible acceptance as he realized there was no escape, no way to fight, no hope of ever being human again. I watched his movements become more mechanical, more resigned, not because he was becoming mindless, but because he was learning to survive. Learning that resistance only brought pain, that the only way to endure was to obey, and I couldn't reach out to him, couldn't offer any comfort or solidarity, could only watch as he joined us in our silent suffering. Sometimes I'd see him looking at the other servitors, his optical implants scanning their faces, and I knew what he was doing. The same thing I had done, looking for others who were still aware, looking for any sign that he wasn't alone. I wanted to tell him, "You're not alone. There are dozens of us here. We're all trapped. We all remember. We're all still human, underneath the metal and the programming." but I couldn't. My Vox grill would only let me speak work-related responses. My behavioral inhibitors wouldn't let me do anything outside my assigned functions, so I just kept working and watching and suffering in silence. The worst thing I witnessed, worse even than my own conversion, worse than watching the new ones arrive, was watching servitors break down. Not mechanical breakdowns. Mental ones. It happened more often than you'd think. The Mechanicus, for all their efficiency and precision, couldn't perfectly predict what would happen when you left a human mind aware enough to think but trapped in a body it couldn't control. Doing work it couldn't refuse. Suffering pain it couldn't escape. Some minds just broke. I saw it happen to Delta 38821 MK7, the welding servitor who I'd recognized as aware. She'd been working normally, or as normally as any of us worked, when suddenly she just stopped. Mid-weld, her arms went still, the plasma torches still active and burning, but her body completely frozen. At first, I thought it was a mechanical malfunction. But then I saw her optical implants. They were scanning frantically, randomly, like someone having a seizure. Her Vox grill started emitting sounds that weren't words, just noise. Screaming maybe, or trying to scream, filtered through the mechanical limitations of her voice synthesizer. The manufacturer's control systems detected the malfunction immediately. An override signal was sent to her cortex collar, forcing her body to return to work. But I could see she was still breaking down inside. Her movements became erratic. She welded in the wrong places, set materials down incorrectly. All minor errors, but consistent ones. After 3 hours of this, they pulled her from the line. I watched them take her away, her body moving under override commands while her optical implants still scanned frantically, still showed that terrible awareness behind them. They took her to the maintenance facility, and I never saw her again. I learned later from observing the maintenance logs displayed in my visual feed that she'd been classified as cortical degradation, catastrophic, recommend full lobotomization and reprogramming. They'd finished the job, scooped out whatever was left of her mind, made her truly mindless. In a horrible way, it was mercy. I saw it happen to others too. Gamma 14429 MK5, the cargo servitor who'd shown frustration. One day he just started smashing cargo containers, his massive arms crushing them with hydraulic force, destroying millions of thrones worth of materials before they could override him and shut him down. I saw a maintenance servitor start deliberately damaging equipment, subtle things that wouldn't be immediately noticed, but that would cause failures later. When they caught him, they didn't just lobotomize him. They scrapped him entirely, harvested his parts for other servitors. The Mechanicus called these events cortical instability. In the reports that sometimes flashed through my visual display, they'd discuss the phenomenon with clinical detachment. Certain neural configurations, they noted, were prone to degradation when subjected to servitor protocols. They were working on better screening methods, better surgical techniques, better behavioral inhibitors. They never considered that maybe, just maybe, leaving humans aware while trapping them in servitor bodies was inherently unstable. That consciousness wasn't meant to be caged like this. That suffering had limits before the mind shattered, or maybe they did consider it and just didn't care. I lived in fear of my own breakdown. Every day I felt the pressure building, the constant awareness of my imprisonment, the inability to express myself, to move freely, to be human. It was like being buried alive, but worse because the burial never ended. I couldn't suffocate, couldn't die, could only endure day after day, year after year. Sometimes I thought I'd welcome the breakdown, welcome the madness. At least then it would be over. At least then they'd finish the lobotomy and I'd finally stop being aware. But it never came. Something in my neural structure, some quirk of my brain chemistry kept me stable, kept me aware, kept me suffering but functional. I don't know if that makes me strong or just cursed. In my third year, or what I think was my third year, Time being as fluid as it was, I learned something that made my horror complete. The Manufactorum's control system sometimes broadcast information to all servitors simultaneously. Status updates, new procedures, efficiency requirements. Usually I ignored these broadcasts, just another layer of noise in the constant data stream fed to my visual display. But one day, the broadcast included production statistics, specifically, statistics about servitor production across the Imperium. The numbers were incomprehensible. Billions, tens of billions. In the Imperium of Man, servitors weren't a small population of repurposed criminals. They were a fundamental part of the infrastructure. Every starship had thousands of servitors. Every Hive City had millions. Every manufactorum, every government building, every military installation. And where did they come from? Not just criminals. Not just the guilty. The broadcast listed the sources. Criminal repurposing, 12%. VAT-grown biological components, 31%. Corpse recycling, 19%. Administrative failures, 23%. Voluntary servitorization, 1%. Other sources, 14%. Let that sink in. Only 12% of servitors were actual criminals. The rest were people who'd failed administratively, like me, or were grown specifically to be servitors, or were made from corpses, or, and this was the most chilling, volunteered for conversion because they were so desperate or broken that becoming a servitor seemed like an improvement. And that 14% other sources? I could only imagine. Political prisoners, dissidents, people who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Children who'd been orphaned and deemed useful. The Imperium wasted nothing. Every body was a resource to be exploited. 23% administrative failures. That meant 1 in 4 servitors had been converted not for crimes, but for mistakes. Being late, missing quotas, filing incorrect paperwork. Minor infractions that in any sane society would result in a reprimand or fine. In the Imperium, they result in this. And here's the truly horrifying part. The broadcast included efficiency analysis. Servitors were, on average, 47% more productive than normal human workers. They didn't need sleep, didn't need breaks, didn't require payment or motivation. Could work in environments lethal to unaugmented humans. From a purely economic standpoint, converting humans to servitors made perfect sense. That's what the Imperium does. It takes the logic of efficiency and productivity and pushes it to its absolute horrifying extreme. Humans aren't valued as individuals, as thinking beings with hopes and dreams and rights. We're resources. When we're more valuable as servitors than as citizens, we get converted. Simple as that. And how many of us, I wondered, were like me? Still aware, still conscious, still suffering behind the mechanical exteriors? The Mechanicus knew about the problem. Their reports sometimes referenced residual consciousness in servitor population and acceptable levels of cortical retention. They knew, and they considered it acceptable, because those of us with residual consciousness were more adaptable, more capable of handling complex tasks. Our suffering made us useful. Therefore, our suffering was acceptable. That's the Imperium. That's the society we lived in, worked for, were loyal to. And it converted us into this, without hesitation. And there was nothing we could do about it. I don't know how long I've been like this now. My chronometer says 5 years, 3 months, and 17 days. But it feels longer. Much longer. The other aware servitors I'd identified have slowly disappeared. Some broke down mentally and were lobotomized. Some wore out physically and were recycled. Some were reassigned to other facilities. New ones arrive regularly to replace them. And the cycle continues. Awareness, horror, gradual resignation, eventual breakdown or transfer, but I remain. Still aware, still suffering, still unable to escape. I've stopped hoping for death. My body is too well maintained for that. The Mechanicus keeps us in perfect working order, replacing worn components, treating infections, ensuring we remain productive. My organic parts have been supplemented multiple times now. New muscle tissue when the old tore beyond repair, New skin grafts to cover the metal interfaces. New organs when mine began to fail. I am immortal in the worst possible way. Sometimes I think about my sister. She'd be 35 now if she's still alive. Maybe she has children. Maybe they work in the same manufactorum I did. Maybe someday one of them will be converted too, and we'll pass each other in the corridor, neither recognizing the other. That's the Imperium. That's the future. Generations of humans, converted into servitors, serving the endless machine of humanity's survival. We're the fuel that keeps the Imperium running, burned up and discarded. Our consciousness just collateral damage in the pursuit of efficiency. I see new servitors arrive almost weekly now. Young ones, old ones, men and women, even children sometimes. Small bodies converted into cherubs or specialized maintenance units. And I can see which ones are still aware. I've gotten good at recognizing the signs, the slightly erratic movements, the scanning optical implants, the hesitation before executing commands. I want to reach out to them, want to tell them they're not alone, want to tell them that it gets easier, not better, never better, but easier to bear. But I can't. My Vox grill won't let me. My behavioral inhibitors won't let me. All I can do is watch as they go through what I went through, learning the same horrible lessons. We're everywhere, the aware servitors. On starships, manning the guns and operating the airlocks. In Hive Cities, maintaining infrastructure and serving the wealthy. In manufactorums like this one, building the components that keep the Imperium functioning. In government buildings, processing data and managing archives. Millions of us, maybe billions, all suffering in silence, all trapped in bodies we can't control, doing work we can't refuse, unable even to scream, and nobody knows. Nobody cares. To the Imperium, we're just servitors, useful tools, biological machinery, but we're not. We're still human, still aware, still here. If you're hearing this, and I don't know how you could be, since I can't actually speak these words, only think them, then somehow, someway, you've learned the truth about servitors. We're not machines. We're not mindless. Some of us, many of us, are still aware. Every servitor you see shuffling through a starship corridor might be conscious, might be screaming inside, might be desperate for death, or hope, or just some acknowledgement that they're still human. The Arbite who patrols your street, he might pass servitors every day and never think twice about them. The noble who's served by cherubs and servo skulls, she might never realize that those floating attendants were children once, aware and suffering. The tech priest who maintains the servitors, he knows. Emperor above, he knows, and he doesn't care. Because to the Mechanicus, consciousness is just a side effect. Suffering is just data. This is the Imperium of Man. This is what we do to ourselves, to each other, in the name of efficiency and survival. We take humans, people with names, with families, with dreams, and we convert them into tools. And some of them, through error or necessity, remain aware enough to experience every moment of their transformation and imprisonment. I am Marcus Thane. I was 27 years old when they took me. I was guilty of being 14 minutes late to work. That was 5 years ago, or 50, or 500. Time doesn't matter anymore. I am Labor Servitor Theta 74427 MK3. I drill holes in bulkheads and lift heavy loads. I do this 16 hours a day, every day, forever. And I am still aware. We are all still aware. And there is no escape, no hope, no end. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is what the Imperium does to its own people. Remember us. Remember that servitors were human once. Remember that some of us still are. The sound of mechanical breathing continues. The hydraulics hiss. The drill arm whirs to life. Another shift begins. Another load is lifted. Another hole is drilled. Forever. They say you forget everything when they turn you into a servitor. They're wrong. We remember everything, and that's the worst part.